Before we begin, subscribe now if you want deep, evidence-based breakdowns of Dr. Willie Soon's research, because this story only gets more intense from here. What if the biggest story about climate change isn't just about carbon dioxide, but about the sun? For decades, the world has heard a consistent message. Rising CO₂ from human activity is driving modern global warming. Governments cite it. International panels repeat it. News headlines reinforce it. But one scientist inside the halls of Harvard's research community looked in a different direction. His name is Willie Soon. Born in Malaysia and trained in aerospace engineering at the University of Southern California, Dr. Soon earned his PhD studying high-temperature gas dynamics, complex physics tied to extreme environments. Not politics, not activism, physics. He later became affiliated with the Solar and Stellar Physics Division at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. His focus? The sun, not just as a glowing star in the sky, but as a variable engine, a driver, a force that may influence Earth's climate more deeply than many are willing to consider. Here's the question that would shape his career. What if changes in solar activity, not just greenhouse gases, play a dominant role in climate variation? It sounds simple. It is not. The prevailing scientific consensus, summarized in major climate assessments, holds that human-produced greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, are the primary driver of recent warming. This conclusion is supported by multiple independent lines of evidence: atmospheric measurements, radiative forcing calculations, satellite data, and climate modeling. Dr. Soon did not deny that CO₂ is a greenhouse gas. Instead, he questioned magnitude, scale, relative influence, and that difference would ignite controversy. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Soon co-authored research examining correlations between solar irradiance and historical temperature patterns. Solar irradiance refers to the amount of solar energy reaching Earth. While the sun's output is relatively stable, it does fluctuate through sunspot cycles, magnetic activity, and longer-term solar variations. Soon's argument was that these fluctuations might be more climatically significant than many models assume. He explored historical climate records, ice cores, tree rings, paleoclimate reconstructions, and he began suggesting that climate variability over centuries could correlate with solar activity cycles. Then came 2003. Soon, along with Sally Baliunas, published a review paper in the journal Climate Research examining climate proxies over the past 1,000 years. The paper argued that the 20th century may not have been uniquely warm compared to earlier periods, such as the medieval warm period. That claim directly challenged a central narrative at the time, that recent warming was unprecedented in at least the past millennium. The reaction was immediate. Several scientists criticized the methodology, arguing that the paper misinterpreted proxy data and blurred the distinction between regional and global signals. Some editorial board members of the journal resigned. The publisher later acknowledged that the peer review process had flaws. Supporters of Soon argued that scientific debate is essential. Critics said the conclusions were not supported by robust evidence. And just like that, the debate shifted from solar physics to scientific credibility. But here is what makes this story compelling. Dr. Soon did not disappear. He continued publishing. He continued arguing that solar variability deserved more weight in climate discussions. He emphasized that correlation between solar cycles and temperature trends in certain datasets suggested the sun's role might be underestimated. He also raised questions about climate sensitivity, how strongly Earth's temperature responds to CO₂ increases. If climate sensitivity is lower than projected, the policy implications change dramatically. And that is where science meets stakes. Because climate science is not just academic. It shapes energy systems, regulation, global economics. So let's pause and ask you something directly. If one variable in a complex system is possibly overestimated, shouldn't it be rigorously re-examined? Or does consensus settle the matter? In later papers, Soon argued that some temperature reconstructions overemphasized anthropogenic signals while underrepresenting natural variability. He pointed to solar magnetic cycles and long-term oscillations as potentially significant contributors. But mainstream climate researchers responded with counter-analyses. They noted that direct satellite measurements of solar irradiance since the late 1970s show only small fluctuations, too small. In their assessment, to explain the magnitude of recent warming. Multiple studies concluded that solar forcing trends have been relatively flat while global temperatures continued rising. That disconnect is central to the disagreement. Soon's position suggests models may underestimate indirect solar effects, mechanisms not fully captured. The consensus position argues the physics of greenhouse gas radiative forcing is well established and quantitatively dominant in modern warming. So who is right? And how do we measure truth in a system as complex as Earth's climate? There's another layer. Funding. Investigations revealed that over a span of years, Dr. Soon received funding from organizations connected to fossil fuel interests. Reports indicated that some published papers did not fully disclose these funding sources. This raised conflict of interest concerns. Soon responded that funding sources do not determine scientific validity and that research should be judged on data and methods. Institutions reviewed policies. Critics intensified scrutiny. Supporters warned of political pressure on dissenting voices. Now ask yourself, can a scientist challenge consensus without being seen as a threat? Or is scrutiny simply part of scientific accountability? The tension grew. Soon became a prominent figure in climate policy debates, often cited by groups skeptical of mainstream climate conclusions. But within academic climate science, his interpretations remained a minority view. Yet minority views have shaped science before. Sometimes they collapse. Sometimes they transform understanding. Which category does this fall into? In part 2, we go deeper. We examine the scientific mechanics of solar forcing versus CO₂ radiative physics. We analyze how climate models calculate sensitivity. We confront the strongest arguments against Soon's position. And we ask the hardest question of all. What happens when science becomes inseparable from global policy? Because this debate is not only about data. It is about trust. And in the end, trust may be the most powerful force of all. Subscribe now if you want the full breakdown in part 2. The sun is still rising tomorrow, but the argument about its power is far from settled. Part 2, Physics, Pressure, and the Cost of Dissent. If the sun truly drives more of Earth's climate than carbon dioxide, the implications would be enormous. Energy policy would shift. Climate projections would change. Global agreements would face new scrutiny. That is why the scientific details matter. Let's break this down carefully. Carbon dioxide absorbs infrared radiation. This is measurable in laboratory physics. Increase CO₂ concentration, and you increase radiative forcing, energy trapped in the climate system. Climate sensitivity estimates how much warming results from a doubling of CO₂. Mainstream assessments place likely equilibrium sensitivity in a moderate range, supported by models, paleoclimate evidence, and observational constraints. Dr. Willie Soon has questioned whether those sensitivity estimates may be too high. He argues that natural variability, including solar influences, may account for a larger share of observed warming, which would imply lower climate sensitivity to CO₂. This is not a claim that CO₂ does nothing. It is a claim about proportion, about dominance. Soon has examined solar magnetic cycles and correlations between long-term solar activity reconstructions and historical temperature records. He suggests that solar variability may influence cloud formation, atmospheric circulation, or oceanic cycles more than current models reflect. Critics respond that while solar variability influences climate on certain timescales, the magnitude of change in solar irradiance over recent decades is too small to explain rapid modern warming. Satellite measurements show limited upward solar trends since the late 20th century. Temperature, however, continued to rise. That divergence forms the backbone of the rebuttal. But Soon has argued that indirect mechanisms, beyond simple irradiance, may amplify solar influence. Some researchers have explored cosmic ray cloud hypotheses and solar magnetic modulation, though these mechanisms remain debated and not widely accepted as dominant drivers. So we arrive at a scientific crossroads. Is solar forcing underestimated? Or is CO₂ radiative forcing correctly quantified and dominant? Scientific bodies such as NASA and major climate research institutions maintain that greenhouse gases are the primary cause of recent warming. Soon maintains that the case is not closed. Here's the deeper tension. Climate models are complex systems integrating atmospheric chemistry, ocean physics, radiation, aerosols, and feedback loops. If one parameter is slightly off, projections shift. Soon argues for more skepticism in interpreting model certainty. Opponents argue that multiple independent methods converge on similar conclusions about CO₂ dominance. So let me ask you, how much uncertainty is acceptable before policy action becomes premature? And how much delay is dangerous if the mainstream view is correct? This is not merely academic. Climate science influences trillions of dollars in global economic planning. Soon has testified in policy contexts, presenting his interpretation of the data. Critics argue that selective use of correlations does not overturn broader evidence. Supporters argue that dissent strengthens science. Meanwhile, the funding controversy added another layer. Reports indicated over $1 million in funding from energy-related sources over a period of years. Concerns focused on disclosure transparency. Soon has stated that funding does not dictate results. Institutions reinforced disclosure requirements. The debate became not only about physics, but about credibility. And credibility shapes public perception. Ask yourself honestly, when you hear consensus, do you feel reassured or skeptical? When you hear dissent, do you think courage or contrarianism? That psychological reaction matters. Because climate science lives in the public eye, Dr. Willie Soon remains a polarizing figure. His research continues to be cited in debates about solar variability and climate sensitivity. But within mainstream climatology, his conclusions remain outside the dominant framework. And yet, the sun continues its cycles. Solar maxima, solar minima, magnetic reversals, quiet phases, active phases. We are observing in real time. The final question may not be who wins this argument. It may be whether scientific systems can accommodate minority hypotheses without collapsing into tribal conflict. Science advances through testing, through replication, through evidence. If solar forcing is stronger than currently estimated, future data will reveal it. If CO₂ dominance is as strong as mainstream science concludes, that evidence will continue to accumulate. Either way, the truth is not decided by volume. It is decided by measurement. So where do you stand? Is Willie Soon a necessary skeptic asking hard questions? Or a scientist whose conclusions do not align with the weight of evidence? Or is the real issue how we evaluate complex science under political pressure? Tell us in the comments. Your perspective matters. Subscribe now for more in-depth breakdowns of Dr. Willie Soon's research, his published work, and the scientific responses to it. Because understanding the argument is more powerful than choosing sides. And in the debate between the sun and CO₂, the future will be written not by opinion, but by data.